everyone. For activity 9, we're going to be looking at the development of balance, particularly whatever the developmental status of an individual is at a given amount of time. So this lab has been adapted from Lab Activity 4.3 in HK Propel. So you only need to use what I've given you for this week. You have a data file that you're going to record your own data in and then also perform some calculations based on some group data that were collected in a previous semester. So I had 19 students who had recorded 7 different balance tests, and each value recorded in the spreadsheet represents their greatest balance time in seconds achieved across 3 trials. And then all of their balance tests were terminated if they were able to reach 120 seconds. So that's kind of like the cutoff point. For you guys, you're going to perform the same balance tests, and you'll also perform them 3 times each, recording the time in seconds for each task under the appropriate columns in the spreadsheet. I would give yourself about an hour to complete the tests with appropriate rest times. So you're not going to be able to balance for 120 seconds for every single test. That is a guarantee, just based on the test you're performing. But a maximum of 2 minutes should be allocated to each trial, and there are 3 trials for 7 tests. So that's, if you think about it, about 6 minutes plus a 1-minute rest time in between each test. So give yourself about 10 minutes for each test. That puts you at about an hour, given that each test is not actually going to take the 2 minutes. But I would allocate an hour just so you have sufficient time to do everything. I've given you a link to a random number generator. It's Google's random number generator, and that'll help determine the order of your tests. You'll set the minimum value to 1, the maximum value to 7, and then whatever number is generated will represent the test you perform. Okay. There are numbers next to the test descriptions down below, so that helps you figure out which one you're doing. And then you just keep randomizing that generator until all of your tests have been completed 3 times. So if you've completed, say, test 5 3 times already, and you get 5 again in the generator, you just skip over it until you get a number that you haven't completed that test 3 times for. You can voluntarily stop each of the balance tests if you reach 120 seconds. All tests are considered prematurely terminated, so involuntarily terminated, if you lose the form that's described or you can't continue due to postural muscle fatigue. So a lot of these are going to be endurance, and some of you might start to get tired or sore in between. So that's why I have that you should take at least a 1-minute rest between trials to counteract any potential effects of fatigue. So that way you have some time to recover in between. All of the balance tasks should be performed on a firm, flat surface as well as barefoot. And then for single leg tasks, you're going to use your dominant leg. There are only 2 tests out of the 7 that are not single leg tasks. So if that gives you an idea about the fatigue factor, take your 1-minute rest. You'll thank yourself later. I do have visual examples of each of the balance tests. They are in a document, so you can look at those. Not all of the pictures completely replicate what the test should look like, but I put little notes if their arm position isn't correct in the picture or something. I also have descriptions of each of the balance tests below. So you're going to do a stork stand with no heel raise and eyes open, a stork stand, no heel raise, eyes closed, stork stand with a heel raise, eyes open, with a heel raise, eyes closed, tandem stance, which is basically just putting one foot, your dominant foot, in front of your non-dominant foot, like heel to toe. You'll do that with your eyes open as well as your eyes closed. And then the last test is called front scale. which is kind of like a dodo bird stance, if you guys are familiar with those, okay? In all of these tests, I did kind of a practice run for myself. For the single leg tasks, especially the ones with your eyes closed, if you're using your phone as a stopwatch, it's okay if you hold your phone while you're doing the test to get a more accurate time. So especially for the ones with your eyes closed, once you press start, you can just keep your thumb hovered over the stop button. That way when you fall, you press stop right away. Okay, that way you don't have this little wiggle room for the actual time that it took you to complete the test. But also that allows you to keep an eye on the time, so if you have an easier balance task and you reach 120 seconds, you're not just standing there forever. For the calculations, I'll pull up the spreadsheet so you get to see what the data look like, or a sample set of data might look like. You will be creating a graph comparing your individual scores to the group scores that I've given you, and then we'll go over the questions that are in the answer sheet in a second, okay? So this is the Google random number generator. If you don't want to use the link, you can literally just type in random number generator and this is what pops up. You'll set, again, the minimum to 1, the maximum to 7, because that represents each test number. And then you click generate, and you can see the number pops up on the side here. So let's say that I generated and my first test was number 6. So I would go to my data. I've already filled this in. Okay, those are my times. But I would go to my data and I'd say, okay, test 6 is the tandem stance with the eyes closed. I would perform that test, record my time, take my 1-minute rest, go back to the random number generator, generate a new number. Now I'm doing test 1. So then I do trial 1 of test 1, record my time, 1-minute rest, generate another number. Oh look, we're doing test 6 again. Trial 2, right? And then so on and so forth until you've got all of your trials completed. From there, you're going to calculate your average time as well as the standard deviation for that time. And these are functions that we've used before on previous activities. I will say for consistency, because most phones will give you up to 2 decimal places on your time, please record it as accurately as possible. And then I'm going to copy these functions across here. Okay, so once you've done your calculations for yourself, you'll then go to the tab that says results. And you'll see these are the class data that have been collected previously. We're going to calculate the mean and the standard deviation for each of these tests here. Okay. And then you'll notice if we scroll over to the side, all of the averages that you just calculated for the group have been auto-populated into this table, and then all of your individual means that you calculated for yourself are also populated into this table. Similarly, the standard deviations have been separated into their own table, and that's because they're going to be used for error bars only. So from here, what we can do is highlight our averages and insert a clustered bar graph. We should notice or get something that kind of looks like this, and I'm going to make this bigger so that it's a little bit easier to see. Also, I'll make the font larger so that we're not squinting. Okay, For your chart elements, you're going to have an appropriate chart title. Your primary horizontal axis titles are just these names of the tests. The primary vertical axis is going to represent the time in seconds. Okay. And then to add the error bars, this isn't something we've done in any of our classes before or in activities. So you'll go to the chart design tab, add chart elements, error bars, more error bar options. When you click on that, it should ask you which mean you want to add the error bars to. So I'll do the group mean since that's the first one listed. This should bring up a toolbar on the side, and you want to choose custom. So we're under like this error bar options section. Custom, specify value. Now, you'll know that standard deviation is usually represented as plus or minus the mean. So our positive error value is going to be the standard deviation above the mean. The negative error value will be the standard deviation below the mean. So if I click on my positive error value, I can select my group standard deviations. And then for my negative error value, I can select that same set of data for all of the balance tests. And then click OK. All right. Then I can go back to my chart design tab, add chart elements, error bars, more error bar options. Now I'll choose my individual mean, and then we'll do the same process. So you're going to make sure you're under this tab in the formatting toolbar. Go to custom, specify value. The positive error value will now be my individual standard deviation calculations for all of my balance tests. And then the same would go for my negative error value. Okay, so now my standard deviations have been recorded here. If there's the case, and I'm assuming this is going to be for everybody because there's a very large degree of variability with this particular test, what we're going to do for our error bars in this class is just show the plus direction. And then I'll click on the group ones to change it to plus. That way we don't have a negative scale at the bottom. I am picky and I like no decimal places because these are whole numbers. So I'm dumb. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. But basically this is what your graph will look like. And now you can look at the comparison of the group means to your test performance to see how your performance lined up with the rest of this other class. Now, it is good to keep in mind that when you performed your tests, you only have a sample size of 3 trials. So if you had a really, really good trial, that's going to skew your time up. If you had a really bad trial, that's going to skew your time downwards. Okay? If all of your trials are kind of clustered around similar time values, then that is a little bit more reflective of your actual balance ability. The other thing to remember is that these class data that are presented here are the maximum times that people reported. Okay? So they did their 3 trials and then they said, all right, my best out of 3 is the one that gets put in this graph. Okay. You'll also notice that there are some people who maybe were really just not good at one test, but the rest of the class did really well. Okay. So these are all things to kind of keep in mind when you're looking at your mean calculations, looking at the comparisons of your tests, and that potentially could influence how you answer some of the questions on the answer sheet. So coming back to our answer sheet, in the first question, you're just going to copy and paste the graph you created. Double check the grading criteria for the graph to make sure you have all the appropriate elements in your chart. Then using that chart, you'll consider the group average balance times as well as your own and your experience performing the tests. Then you're going to order the assessments from easiest to hardest. This may or may not vary from person to person. So there's really no absolute correct answer, but your order should be informed by the data that were collected. So in question number 3, you're going to speculate if there was something in particular that made a particular task easier or harder, and then provide reasoning for your choices. For question number 4, if an older adult, 60 and older, performed each of these tasks, do you think you would reorder the tasks by level of difficulty? If you would keep your existing order, maybe explain why. And then you're going to list some factors that could cause detriments to the ability to balance well. Okay, you should have at least 2 or 3. We did discuss several factors within the lecture, and as well as past lectures. So in terms of what the aging process does to different body systems, and then we've kind of incorporated that into balance in our lecture discussion for this week. So that's question number 4. And then finally, question number 5 is asking you to identify which sensation or perception would be most difficult for children to process in the balance tasks and give an explanation for why. If you guys have any questions on how you're supposed to perform the tests, or if you have questions on graphing or calculations, please let me know. Again, there are visual pictures of each balance test, so you're making sure you're collecting things correctly.